thank you for all of you for being here. A big thank you to Dr. David Breakstone. Really, truly appreciate you being here with us this morning. Dr. David Breakstone serves as the deputy chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency for Israel. Today, Dr. David Breakstone will be discussing the topic from Mount Sinai to Mount Herzl. Without further ado, Dr. Breakstone.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I really do appreciate it. So the topic today really is the connection between Mount Sinai and Mount Herzl. And the idea of the kind of society that we want to fashion today in the Jewish state. There's really a lot on this slide, but one thing that's missing that I'm going to put up right now is a verse from the Torah reading for Shavuot, and you shall be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And for me, that's really what connects one mountain to the other. And of course, when I talk about when I talk about Mount Herzl, I'm using it as a reference really to the entire idea of the Jewish state and what we're doing here in Israel today. As I said, that verse comes from the Torah reading. Now, therefore, if you will obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my special treasure from among all peoples, and you shall be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I think one of the questions we really have to ask ourselves, and Shavuot gives us that opportunity, is what it means to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. What the idea is with the hierarchy and religion, and we know we have Kohanim and Leviim and Yisrael, what it really means for all of us, given that hierarchy that exists in our tradition, what it means in any case for us to all be priests of a sort and to make ourselves really a holy nation. But it's also important to recognize that being that kingdom of priests in the holy nation is dependent. It's a part of a package deal. It's if you will obey my voice and keep my covenant. The special status that we have, so to speak, being the chosen people and Am Segula, is not something that is automatic. It's really dependent on the way that we behave and the kind of society that we create. Although I started with the Torah reading for Shavuot, this concept really goes way back to the very beginning of our becoming a people, and a nation of Hebrews and the Jewish people. It goes all the way back to when God spoke to Abraham and told him to venture out from his comfort zone, so to speak, from his hometown, his home country, onto a land that I will show thee. And there again, it also says, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee. And very often we say, that sounds good to me, that sounds great, for us to be this great nation and to be blessed. But here too, right from the beginning, and sometimes we forget this, that this too is, doesn't end there, this verse. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Right from the beginning, our mission was not only to fend for ourselves, not to travel to that other land, not only so that we would have a safe place to live and a place where we would be able to develop our own culture and our own civilization, our own values, our own traditions, but that we would do that in such a manner that we really would be a blessing to all others. And that's something that we shouldn't forget. Again, that the idea of anything that makes us special is for a greater purpose. How are we going to do that? How are we going to become that kind of society? See, I have imparted to you laws and rules as the Lord my God has commanded me. for you to abide by in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. Observe them faithfully. Again, we were sent, Abraham was sent, we journeyed along with him to the land of Israel. But again, we are reminded that we were sent there with a special mission to live in a certain manner. And here too, by the way, this is spoken as we are on the other side of the Jordan, about to enter the land. We've skipped all the way to Dvarim, to Deuteronomy at this point. Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples, who on hearing of all these laws will say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. To me, this is fascinating, this continuation of this verse. Here we are on the other side of the Jordan, being given marching orders, so to speak, by our leader, being told that we have to go and conquer this land. We know that the land is full of people, and we have to take over the land. And it would seem to me, if I was a general, if I was directing my forces to go into that other land, I wouldn't be concerned with proving my wisdom and discernment to other people. I would be concerned with making sure that they know who's boss, that they know who's in control, that I'm powerful, and that I have means of punishing them and beating them down if necessary. So to me, the proof would want to be that we have strength. And I wouldn't care so much about what these other people, what I would want them to say is, those are people, that's a victor we shouldn't mess around with. And yet what we have here is that we would want others to say about us, that great nation is a wise and discerning people. It's interesting, we very often complain about the double standard that others impose upon us, that they expect us to act in a certain way and to be more moral and to be more righteous and so on. And we resent it when they demand that of us. And yet, if we look inside our own sources, it's really that we've imposed, or it's been imposed upon us, this way of behaving and of being that really is different than that which is expected of other people, to be that wise and discerning people. Once we get there into that land, the Lord shall greatly bless you in the land. But only if you carefully hearken to the voice of the Lord your God. And of course, we have to ask ourselves what it is that the Lord our God is going to be saying to us, what we have to hearken to. And there are so many things that continue in this vein. Here's one: if there be among you a poor person, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him. Another example: appoint judges and magistrates in all your gates. And you all know that we opened this week with the trial of a sitting prime minister. And whatever one's position is on that trial, and whatever one thinks of Netanyahu, I think that this verse here from Shoftim is particularly relevant. Appoint judges and magistrates in all your gates that the Lord your God is giving to you for your tribes, that they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. Do not judge unfairly, do not show partiality, and do not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the wise and pervert the words of the righteous. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Tzedek, tzedek, yirdof, that you may live and possess the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And again, we see this as part of a package deal. We can't take for granted our being here. We can't take for granted that we will stay here forever. that staying on this land is really, again, contingent on us upholding the moral laws that have been given to us. When you have begotten children and children's children, and are long established in the land, should you act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness, causing the Lord your God displeasure and vexation, I call heaven and earth this day to witness against you, that you shall soon perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You shall not long endure in it, but shall be utterly wiped out. Another interesting verse, in that we understand this land to have been given to us for all time, that it's an eternal promise from God that this is our land. And yet here there's the threat that we could be utterly wiped out from the promise that we've had. And of course, we can explain it in part by referencing what I spoke about it being a package deal, and the insistence that we live in a certain way. And of course, in our own tradition, we say that we were indeed banished from the land 2,000 years ago, not because of what enemies did to us, that was simply God's means of following through on promises and threats that were made, and punishments that we were warned about. But it was because of the kind of society that we turned into, the sinat chinam, the baseless hatred of one another. And again, I think we could see it in the demonstrations. I don't know how much you were tuned into the news on Sunday at the courthouse and throughout the country, of demonstrations of the right against the left, and vicious things that were said on both sides about the other. And of course, we know that the 3 elections that Israel experienced in this past year, again, were followed campaigns of vitriolic statements, one side making against the other. And the government that came into being of a national unity government, that many people said, well, that's what the people of Israel said that they wanted, a national unity government. In fact, I think that the people of Israel were saying something very different. They were staunchly supporting one side or the other, and it may well be that the national unity government is what the country needs. I would like to think it's also what the country wants. But this idea of us being here and the need to live in a certain way and to find ways of communicating with one another is very important. That we not act wickedly, as it says here, so that we will indeed be able to long endure in this country, in this land of Israel. But even here, even in the Bible, where it says that we'll be utterly wiped out, we also have the verse, the following, also from the same section of Dvarim: observe his laws and commandments, which I enjoin upon you this day, that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may long remain in the land. And here, as I said before, that the Lord your God is assigning you for all time. What does that mean? On the one hand, we can be utterly wiped out, and yet the land, we're told in almost the same verse, that the Lord our God has been assigning us this land for all time. Make up your mind. Are we going to be utterly wiped out, or do we get to stay here forever? And the way that I reconcile those 2 verses is that the actual staying in the land, our presence in the land, is dependent on the way that we behave, the kind of society that we create for ourselves. But that even if we should be banished from the land, we still own the lease, so to speak, that the land has been assigned to us for all time. Whether or not we're actually going to be able to live here depends on who we are and what we become. But the possibility of regaining this land is something that is indeed part of our historical tradition. In this regard, I would suggest that Judaism is a religion, a civilization of second chances. We all know the importance of tshuva, of repentance. We all know the possibilities of being forgiven, and so on and so forth. And even if we take the Bible literally, both the part about being utterly wiped out and about the land being assigned to us for all time, and perhaps that's what sustained us for 2,000 years, the hope that we would indeed be able to return. Of course, 2,000 years did have to elapse between our banishment and our return. And now coming back to Herzl, it was really he who put in motion, of course, the idea that we would, not the idea, but the organizational structure, the political mechanisms that would allow us to return, to take up that second chance, to again cross the Jordan, so to speak, metaphorically, and to come back and create the kind of, and to come back and regain the land. But again, the question is there as to what we were going to do once we got here. And I want to suggest that just as with Abraham, the journey that he set off on was not just to allow us to enter the land and to be there and to have a place of our own, but also it came along with a particular purpose of the kind of society we were trying to create. And here with Herzl, of course, Herzl wrote two seminal works on Zionism, one called The Jewish State, his political manifesto, so to speak, in which he analyzes the condition of the Jewish people and arrives at the conclusion that the only solution to the Jewish problem being anti-Semitism, the only solution to the Jewish problem was for us to create, have a state of our own, a refuge, a safe haven, a place that we would be able to live in. But for Herzl, it was, and many people I would add, consider that to be the end all, the be all and end all of Zionism. That's what Zionism was all about. They read The Jewish State by Herzl and they say, okay, Zionism was all about creating a safe place for the Jews to have. And don't read the rest of what he has went on to write and to the message that he tried to convey. And here we have in one of the very last things that Herzl wrote, it was published just 3 months or so before he died, at the young age of 44, published in a Zionist newspaper for Zionist youth movements in Europe. He wrote, "I truly believe that even after we possess our land, the land of Israel, Zionism will not cease to be an ideal. For Zionism, as I understand it, and who more than Herzl has the right to say what Zionism is, includes not only the yearning for a plot of promised land acquired according to law for our weary people, but also the yearning for ethical and spiritual fulfillment." I don't think there's any more powerful statement than this to refute the idea that Zionism was really only about creating that shelter, that refuge, that miklat for a people that was persecuted. Right from the very beginning, it was about something greater than that. And in his, of course, he goes into the detail as to what this kind of society was going to look like in his second work, a utopian novel called Alt Neuland, Old New Land, which takes place for the most part in an imaginary 1923, published in 1902, of what this Jewish state that he conceived coming into being was going to look like 20 years after it was established. There's a group of people throughout this novel. They're walking through Jerusalem, as I said, 20 years after Israel came into being, or the Jewish state came into being. And what they see is that all the buildings in Jerusalem were devoted to religious and benevolent purposes. This was hospices for pilgrims of all denominations, Muslim, Jewish, Christian welfare institutions, hospitals, clinics stood side by side. And in the middle of a great square was the splendid Peace Palace, where international congresses of peace lovers and scientists were held, for Jerusalem was now a home for the best strivings of the human spirit, for faith, love, and knowledge. And this Peace Palace, which he describes in quite some detail, essentially it collects money from all over the world throughout the year. And anytime there's a natural disaster, whether it's forest fires or earthquakes, tsunami, whenever there are tragedies around the world, people and funding goes out of this Peace Palace to help relieve the suffering of people everywhere, regardless of their faith, ethnicity, nationality, and so on. Very close to, in a way, that what we read of in the biblical verses, of really being a people through which a nation through which the nations of the world would be blessed. We all know the phrase "Or Goyim," a light unto the nations. That's such a fundamental aspect of our tradition, and it turns out, as far as Herzl's concerned, it's also integral and fundamental to the Zionist idea. And in an address to one of the Zionist congresses, he says, "Those of us who are today prepared to hazard our lives for the cause would regret having raised a finger if we were able to organize only a new social system and not a more righteous one." And here again, Herzl knew he was hazarding his life for the cause. His doctors told him to slow down. They told him that he was straining his heart, that he was not in good health, that he shouldn't be traveling all over the place. And he ignored the doctor's orders, of course. If he felt that we had indeed organized only a new social system, only a state that came into being, and were not concerned with making it a more righteous one than those that we had left behind, he would regret. And I'm always feeling that, as you see the picture of him behind me in my office, I always feel that he's looking over my shoulder, making sure that I remember that this is integral to the Zionist idea. Back to Alt Neuland. There is a political rally going on, and one of the leaders of the country is speaking to an assembly of farmers and says to them, "All that you have cultivated will be worthless, and your fields will again be barren." In the book, by the way, he's already made the desert bloom, and worried about the water shortage in all sorts of ways. And he's created, in his mind's eye, a country of amazing agricultural achievement and technological achievement. But he says to them, all that you've done to clear the fields of the stones and water them and so on, all this will be worthless and your fields will again be barren, unless you also cultivate freedom of thought and expression, generosity of spirit, and love for humanity. These are the things you must cherish and nurture. Lest one leave this, I don't want anybody to leave this presentation with the feeling that he was only concerned with being a universalist. Alongside the Peace Palace, I'll just mention, he also reconstructed or rebuilt the temple with a big capital T, and he speaks about it, and he refers to Solomon's temple having been rebuilt and so on. He has amazing scenes of Shabbat in Jerusalem, again, all imaginary. He says the cars that had been filling the streets would come to a standstill, and the stores that were bustling with people would close down as the spirit of Shabbat descended upon the holy city of Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. And he not only builds the temple, but makes sure that it's attended. He talks about, again in his book, about throngs of people working their way through the alleys of both the old city and the new city of Jerusalem to go to synagogue and so on. He himself was not personally observant, but had great respect for the tradition and made sure that in his book there was a lot of strong Jewish connections to the Jewish tradition. And again, he said Zionism is a return to the Jewish fold even before it is a return to the Jewish land. It is true that we aspire to our ancient land, but what we want in that ancient land is a new blossoming of the Jewish spirit. And here in this quote from his diary, it really combines the two, both the Jewish tradition as well as the universalist element in it. I have charged the Jewish people, fashion your state in such a manner that the stranger will feel comfortable among you. Of course, an echo of how many, some 30 times it appears in the Bible about taking care of the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And that too for Herzl was very important. I also don't want you to think it was only Herzl who had this concept of Zionism. Each of the streams of Zionism, whether it was cultural Zionism or labor Zionism or religious Zionism, all of them envisioned Israel becoming a special kind of society. And I skip ahead some 50 years from Herzl up into David Ben-Gurion, who in a book largely of his memoirs, Rebirth and Destiny of Israel, wrote, "By these will the state be judged, by the moral character it imparts to its citizens, by the human values determining its inner and outward relations, and by its fidelity in thought and act to the supreme behest, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Here is crystallized the eternal law of Judaism, and all the written ethics in the world can say no more. The state will be worthy of its name only if its systems, social and economic, political and legal, are based upon these imperishable words. They are more than a formal precept which can be construed as passive or negative, not to deprive, not to rob, not to oppress, not to hurt. So here too, from another of our most prominent Zionists, again, the idea of the kind of state that we're going to be building, that we need to be building, and how we're going to be judged. Again, for me, referring back to the idea of those who we would be conquering, coming to the conclusion that we are that wise and discerning people that we were commanded to aspire to be. From the Bible, we have here, a few thousand years later, a very similar statement from David Ben-Gurion. Another person, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who wrote among his books, Israel, an Echo of Eternity, also relates to the kind of society that we need to be creating here. And he wrote this book after the Six-Day War. He came and he visited Israel and asks, what is the meaning of the state of Israel? Mere self-preservation is regarded as inadequate motivation. Again, going back to the idea that just have a safe place is not enough. Even right after the Six-Day War, when we were being threatened with destruction, and people who lived here and Jews around the world felt that we might be again utterly wiped out, as we were warned about in the Bible. The victory, even immediately after the victory, it wasn't enough for us to sit there and say, okay, we continue to ask ourselves why we are here, what kind of society that we're building. Simply to have a safe place, on the one hand, we can say, Dayenu, yes, Dayenu, we need that safe place. If we only had a shelter and nothing else, Dayenu. But there's something that drives us, that propels us to look for something even more. And here he harks back to Lech Lecha that I shared with you from the beginning of God's commandment to Abraham. Our return to Zion is the major event within the mysterious history that began with a lonely man, Abraham, whose destiny was to be a blessing to all nations. And our irreducible commitment is to assert that promise and that destiny, to be a blessing to all nations. The way of Israel is a way of rising to the peak of the mountain. And here we are back at Shavuot, or again approaching Shavuot. At Sinai, again from the same reading that we'll have in synagogue in another couple of days, those who can get to synagogues or virtually. At Sinai, we were told, beware of going up to the mountain and touching the border of it. This was interpreted by Rabbi Mendel of Katz to mean, beware of going up to the mountain if you have no desire ever to reach the peak. Don't play with the mountain. The vision of reaching the peak gives meaning to our touching its border. And I think here too, we have to take very seriously that our return to Israel, integral to our return to Israel, to our touching the border, so to speak, is to recognize that there is something much more than simply the return that has to propel us. And these things together bring us to the Jerusalem program of the World Zionist Organization. I don't know how many of you participated in the elections this year to the Zionist Congress, but anybody who did was required to express their acceptance of the Jerusalem program. It's the official platform of the Zionist movement. It's the latest incarnation of what was the Basel program that was passed at the first Zionist Congress. It's only been amended 3 times in the last 120 years or so, the last time in 2004. And in drafting the Jerusalem program, and I know it as somebody that was very involved with it, we really referenced both the biblical commandments, some of them that I shared with you, as well as the Zionist imperative, and came up, this is only an excerpt from the Jerusalem program. Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people and the common responsibility of the Jewish people for its continuity and future. And among the foundations of Zionism, strengthening Israel as a Jewish, Zionist, and democratic state, and shaping it as an exemplary society, chevrat mufet, as we say in Hebrew, with a unique moral and spiritual character, marked by mutual respect for the multifaceted Jewish people. If I talked before about unity and sinat chinam, of baseless hatred, this is exactly the opposite. Mutual respect for the multifaceted Jewish people, all of the streams, all of the different ways we express ourselves, rooted in the vision of the prophets, striving for peace and contributing to the betterment of the world. And in Hebrew it says, tikkun olam. And it's in this regard that I think these verses together really, for me, make this connection between Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, and what we were commanded there. And of course, when I talk about Mount Sinai, it's really the entire Torah and Jewish civilization, Jewish ethics, Jewish values, Jewish traditions, as they've evolved over the century. And Har Herzl, which, as I said, for me is an icon, so to speak, a symbol of the return to Israel and what we're trying to do. And what I would like people to take away from this, as we go enter into the Shavuot holiday, is to really consider themselves as being there with one foot at Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, one foot on Mount Herzl, and figuring out how each and every one of us can be a bridge between the two, to make sure that the kind of society that we're building today is one that reflects the values and so on that we were handed so many thousands of years ago. I believe back to the first quote of Herzl saying that our return is not just that it's not just the matter of having the promised land, but really the striving for spiritual and ethical fulfillment is what Zionism needs to be all about today. So I hope that gives you some food for thought.
Thank you again, David. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again real soon.